Good morning, everyone. This is Chad from Verve Networks. We're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. We've got a few other folks who are waiting to arrive, so please stand by and we'll get the conference started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on our webinar today. My name is Chad Sublett, and I'm the Vice President of Sales here at Verve Networks. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Malware 101, everything that you need to know about malware. For those of you not familiar with Verve Networks, we're San Joaquin County's largest provider of IT services and consulting. From our offices located in downtown Stockton, we work with about 100 different companies located throughout Central and Northern California every day. Our clients consist of both SMB as well as mid-sized companies, and we have more than 10 years experience helping keep our clients' critical data safe and secure. These days, more and more of our conversations with clients are focused on technology security. Traditionally, small and mid-sized businesses weren't considered primary targets for cyber attacks, but as criminals began to realize these types of companies were easier to penetrate and more likely to pay ransom, things changed, and their focus moved from the Yahoos and the Experians of the world to folks just like y'all. Looking towards the future, companies just like the ones on this webinar need to create a strong security platform. IT security is all about defense in depth with multiple layers of protection. Here at Verve, we can help you with all of your cybersecurity needs, but one of the most critical components of your cybersecurity strategy is your modern-day firewall, which serves as a unified threat management device. When it comes to modern-day firewalls, WatchGuard's the industry leader. Based on their position in the marketplace and quality of their product, we've asked them to provide an informative and educational webinar for you today. Should you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the chat feature, and we'll address those questions at the end. On the webinar with us today is Johan Bloomfield, Virtual CTO for WatchGuard Technologies. Johan is a security hippie turned security evangelist and has been working in information security for the past 22 years. 13 of those years have been in public education as a network operations manager and a director of technology. Other relevant past experiences include starting an ISP, supporting FBI and local law enforcement agency with investigations, was an adjunct instructor of information security, served on the local college advisory board, advises nonprofit organizations on information security best practices, and served in the Army National Guard. Please join me in welcoming Johan. Johan?
Thank you so much, Chad. As Chad mentioned, interesting story about myself, not one I particularly like to share, but I was what I would consider myself as a network hippie. I was at a packet sniffing class one day as an audience member, and I'm sitting there doing some typing away, and all of a sudden, the guy in front of me stands up and he says, "Hey, I know what you're doing. You're surfing some adult content." And while I wasn't doing that, I started thinking about what I was transmitting across the wire and what I was actually doing. And since then, I've turned the page 360 degrees, and I've now thought to myself, this firewalls allowing any, which hopefully none of you have right now, is a bad methodology to have. A lot of our firewalls currently have DNS wide open. When we look at those security precautions, obviously taking those into account is one part of it. And as Chad mentioned, with WatchGuard, we have a UTM, or Unified Threat Management platform, which we'll discuss today. Just want to clarify one thing. The title is Malware 101, everything you need to know about malware, but we aren't going to necessarily be creating malware. It's at more of the defensive side. So just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. So as we look at the definition of malware, back in the day, we used to call it simply viruses. Since then, we've had a number of other items attached to it. So anything that falls under, for instance, a rootkit or keylogger or dialer, spyware. Definitely the most prominent today is what we call or consider ransomware, which we'll go ahead and show you exactly what that ransomware entails, and hopefully you guys haven't had a first-hand experience with that. So trivia question for today: when was the first transmitted virus detected? Now, unfortunately, since you're all on mute, it's a little difficult to answer, but that was 1982. And as Chad mentioned, if you have any questions throughout this, feel free to shoot them through the questions pane, and we will address those at the end for you. So kind of the evolution of technology. I was, in the game for quite a while. My first computer was a Commodore 64 128. And as we look at some of the drivers on that, we have students, obviously, we have virtual reality gaming, self-driving vehicles. And then one of the other things that you might not have picked up on quite yet is this idea of a smart refrigerator, which is the bottom left. So basically it says your meat might be going bad. Why don't you pick up some more milk at the refrigerator? Here's some recipes that you can make with some items in your refrigerator. All of these come together as what we know today as the Internet of Things. So whether it's your home automation, some sort of nanny cam, some sort of security lights, all of those go under the Internet of Things. And as we look at that, this cloud of Internet of Things is just expanding exponentially on what exactly is involved with that. We actually have cars now that join home networks, Wi-Fi networks, they have Bluetooth. So all of these devices come together in Internet of Things. So it wasn't that surprising that I came across this headline. I thought, well, that's a great piece to add to my pitch here. This fridge was caught sending spam emails in a botnet style attack. Over 750,000 spam emails came out of this refrigerator. So while I'm out and about, people say, well, gosh, I'm SMB or my home network. Do I need to worry about anything? So, well, do you have any sort of these devices on your network? For instance, my children, they went to a bounce house, or I took them to a bounce house, went to trampoline parks. And I'm sitting there and they have the free Wi-Fi on the wall. So I joined the Wi-Fi, and being the engineer or a security evangelist I am, I look at my network settings after joining their Wi-Fi. Obviously, I was consider on what traffic I was transmitting across the wire. So if someone were doing a man-in-the-middle attack, they wouldn't be able to listen in. With that being said, I looked at my IP address, went up to the kiosk to actually buy a bottle of water a little bit later, and noticed they had the IP address on a sticky note on the monitor. Completely flat network. And that's a very bad situation, because as you're transmitting, for instance, credit cards on a flat network, anyone can listen in those environments. So as we see the rise of malware prominence over the last 3 years, I'm sure you guys are more than aware that ever since the criminals figured out, hey, we can actually make some money based on ransomware. And that's this idea of holding your files hostage and making you pay to release the key to them. And we'll definitely go show you that. But again, that's basically in this ever since about 2010 on up to current day. And why is it so easy? And we'll talk about why we're still seeing this, why we're still struggling with this from a defensive strategy, and what we can do, obviously, to combat it. So again, prominence over the last 3 years, targeted after small businesses. Ultimately, it comes down to, as we look at the stats of 2016, 30% of malware was 0 day. It wasn't caught by those legacy AV solutions. So you might have remembered about 2 years ago, Symantec came out and one of their VPs came out and said, antivirus is dead. It was a little bit taken out of context, but it was this idea of signature-based antivirus is dead. And that's because there are actually programs out there that you can actually change the DNA on your malware. So that as you send a new piece of malware that the DNA is changed, signatures aren't able to keep up with that. So that's why you need this advanced threat protection or prevention, which we'll cover as well. Macro-based malware is still prevalent. I have an example where I have an Excel spreadsheet that opens, drops a payload on the background, and it executes it without any sort of interaction from the user, and automatically CryptoLocker covers the desktop or encrypts the desktop. JavaScript is a popular malware delivery and obfuscation mechanism. When we talk about our users and our computers, how we keep our devices up to date, I hear a lot of organizations say, gosh, I don't worry about updates. I let my users worry about that. And as I was heading on the plane yesterday, wrapping up the presentation for today, it said, gosh, or my laptop said, Johan, you have some new updates. Do you want to update them? Obviously, that's a very bad time to update them. So I just hit postpone. How many of our network users are just postponing those updates that cover those vulnerabilities, those 0-day vulnerabilities through Java or Flash on there? 73% of top attacks target web browser and drive-by downloads. And going back real quick to the email and web, two of the most dangerous things that we can allow our users to do are email and web. However, that's an integral part of their job function. So we can't really say, you know what, we're going to hire you, but we're taking away email and web surfing services. And exploit kits are a popular malware delivery mechanism. So with an exploit kit, as a hacker, I could go out and say, gosh, I want to start making some money as a criminal and start infecting computers, and I only pay for what is infected. We're also seeing an uptick in Linux-based Trojans, likely connected with IoT devices. So that's where we saw about a year ago where, it felt like 3/4 of the internet was taken down, and that's because these integral services, a part of the network services, were they were unavailable due to denial of service attacks. So just some ransomware quick facts. The price increases over time. So initially it's a $400 ransom. Generally that's depending on the trading value of Bitcoin. $700 if not paid in 3 days. So it goes up. I've even seen some models where they say, we'll prove to you that we'll give you that key and you'll be able to unlock 2 or 3 files. And again, with these files, we're talking about any Word documents that you have, any family pictures, all of those are unusable, which I'll go ahead and demonstrate here in a couple of minutes for you. There's also a freemium model where, as I mentioned, they'll decrypt a handful of files for free, but to get your whole data store back, maybe that's healthcare records. We've heard in the news about hospitals being locked out of their healthcare records, or dentists. And when you talk about that value, certainly $700 is pretty cheap when it comes to the value of your patient's data. However, the cheaper value, or the better way to go, would be to stop that in the first place by leveraging Verve network, by leveraging UTM services, and some of these advanced threat prevention. And then we're actually seeing where the hackers actually have customer service. So, for instance, if my mom doesn't necessarily know how to pay or how to translate money, real currency, into Bitcoin to get her files back, they will actually help her out through that process. And again, all of this is happening due to this programs out there that change DNA structure. So you can download this file on the dark web. Now, this is called PX Crypto, and you might notice that it says input file name. So essentially, you could take a well-known virus, change the DNA structure, and then where it says icon file name, I would imagine, well, I've seen the uptick currently from Amazon Prime deliveries as people are ordering gifts for Christmas. We're seeing fake delivery notices. I would imagine as well, as we're at the new year, we'll start seeing some IRS tax returns where they are actually using real looking graphics from the IRS and making a sophisticated campaign. Exploit kits are sold online, so they're going to scan your system for vulnerabilities. So when it comes to Adobe Reader, Java, or Flash, and I've heard some people say, oh, I don't need to worry about that because I'm actually using Apple product. Well, that's neither here nor there to debate Apple versus Windows. However, you're not using some of these tool sets like Adobe Reader or Java or Flash because those are riddled with security vulnerabilities. The key thing on this, and I want to highlight this, is it needs command and control traffic. Now, as I brought up in the beginning with that DNS traffic being allowed outbound, we're actually seeing now where the bad guys are using DNS channels. They're using the NTP. They're using SSL, which is secure socket layer traffic, encrypted traffic to transmit that command and control traffic or to drop payloads. So as we're looking at, our short-term plan for next year or the roadmap, you should include on there some sort of SSL inspection, certainly as part of your toolkit. Because as we talk about that command and control traffic, if we're able to stop that command and control traffic, a lot of times malware won't even encrypt the files. And then a sample exploit kit, you can go out and get an exploit kit that is usable by anyone, and you only have to pay for successful implementations. And as I mentioned, that antivirus signatures can't keep up. A lot of customers I see, they have a firewall, maybe it's one of our competitors' products, or maybe they've gone to Best Buy and they picked up a Netgear, and they don't have any security services running on there. So they don't have any antivirus signatures or intrusion prevention signatures running. Or perhaps they had at one point, they had services on there and they've let them lapse. So certainly keeping up on your subscriptions is a vital part of your network strategy. Now, as we talk about information security or cyber security, it is a pain. It can be costly. However, most of you actually go ahead and pay insurance for your house, you pay insurance for your car on a monthly basis, and we wouldn't dream of a life where, or maybe we would dream of a life, but it wouldn't ever be an option where we could not pay for that. And the same mentality needs to be applied to network security, where we need to have those insurance policies in place. We need to pay a little bit more for security. So as you can see here, sometimes it takes a couple days for that signature to be released to the wild or released to devices. And sometimes people don't even have their devices set up to automatically update. How much does ransomware cost an average business? So as we look at the threat of ransomware to small businesses and medium businesses, traditionally or on average, we see about $99,000 attack on SMB. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, gosh, Johan, you just said it was $700 on there. It may, in some cases, be $400 to $700 to get your files back, but there's been some cases where they haven't been able to get the files back or the customer's reputation is ruined. So as we look at the next one, 67% suffer a complete or partial loss of that corporate data. Out of only 34% of SMBs admitted to paying the attacker to get business critical data back. And as we look at the shift of focus to smaller businesses, one of those reasons why the why the hackers are shifting their focus is because a lot of our SMBs are not prioritizing cybersecurity or the cost of cybersecurity. So real quick, let's go ahead and switch over before we go into how do we protect ourselves, and switch into this environment. And this is a virtual computer. So if you do dabble in experimenting what actually happens with malware and such, make sure that I can't stress enough, make sure you've set up your precautions enough to be able to protect yourself. Excuse me. So WatchGuard has a service endpoint protection, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But under services, we have TDR. So that's our service that's running on the endpoint. Because as we look at a corporate network, as a computer's corporate network, obviously the firewall is protecting that computer. Does a great job with these advanced services, sandboxing, which we'll cover as well. But what happens when your boss or someone takes a laptop and they say, you know what, we want to leave the environment. We want to go down to Starbucks to finish up this report. What do you do then? Or perhaps you have someone that brings in a jump drive into your network or bypasses the firewall, plugs it directly into the computer, and infects the computer from there. So with TDR, with the endpoint protection, again, we have our service running on the actual endpoint from there. And the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and stop that service from running. So I'm disabling WatchGuard service from running here. I have a couple of different samples on here, but before I do that, I want to just go ahead and show you the implications of ransomware. So under pictures, we have some pictures in here that I downloaded off the internet. There might be a Word documents, resume. Now, the other key on this is that if you have any network storage attached to that desktop, it's going to be like a spider and try to infect any other devices on that network, devices or drives on that network. So again, here we go. In fact, let me go ahead and start it up real quick here. So I'm going to start it. We'll do it reverse. So I'll show you that it's protected. We'll flip it, I'll revert the snapshot, disable that service, and we'll go from there. So one of the things I want to show you real quick here, let's say I have Tesla Crypt, and we're going to drop it onto the desktop. Now, what it's actually doing in the background is it's communicating every minute to the cloud, this ThreatSync cloud. So what it's doing is it's analyzing any new file read-write. So if someone plugged in a jump drive, it would pick that up and analyze that. So right now it's checking in a minute, going into the cloud and saying this file was just dropped. We also have the ability to upload it to sandboxing as well from there. Let me just go ahead and show that to you here. So we have in the cloud management support center, I'm going to log into that TDR cloud so that you can actually see that process running. So as we go in and we go into that account, it just removed that file, as you can see here. But under that account, it shows us all the activity of that client. It shows us how many indicators, how many remediations were moved. So this was, I believe it's the 12th today that just happened on the 12th, and it removed that file from the desktop. Now I'm going to go ahead and shut this down, or let's go ahead and revert it real quick here. So I'm going to revert to snapshot. Again, I can't stress the importance enough that if you're dabbling in looking at how these different malicious files interact with the desktop, that you have taken all the necessary precautions. So in this environment, we might get, for instance, I'm sure a lot of you deal with Excel documents in your business. So it wouldn't be that surprising that you get some sort of shipping status with an Excel document attached. Again, we have here TDR, Threat Detect and Response, and that's currently running. I'm going to go ahead and launch shipping status. Now, as I do, I want you to notice I don't need to do anything other interaction with that, and it's going to encrypt all my files. I go ahead and click on it. It's opening Excel, and what it's doing in the background is dropping a payload, and that payload is coming over HTTPS channel, encrypted channel. So that is because a lot of firewalls aren't able to inspect that service. Oops, let me go ahead and stop that. Let me try that again. Sorry about that. I thought I stopped TDR service from running. So we have the Excel document. As you notice, it killed the Excel document. And now we can see all of those files become an ECC file. They're all encrypted. And in a few seconds here, you'll see that the splash screen, your files are encrypted, and it says enter decryption, and you have your payment key. You also have your private key will be destroyed on. So it now is holding my files ransom. So that is ransomware in its truest form. Hopefully you guys haven't seen that firsthand, but certainly we'll go in on how to address and stop some of the tips that we can do to stop that from happening in our environment. So as Chad mentioned, there is no one single silver bullet that we can implement on there. However, when we talk about multi-vectors or as defense in depth strategy, that is what we're seeing here, where if you go to Best Buy and you buy, for instance, a Netgear, some sort of router, that's just a firewall level. You're only doing network address translation or port address translation. What we can do from there is add on additional security services from WatchGuard. So we have intrusion prevention signatures, we have antivirus, anti-spam, reputation services, APT protection, which is sandbox analysis, and that's to address those files that we don't have signatures for. And then TDR, which is that threat detect and response, which I showed you working as well. So with the UTM, again, some of you might have appliances for each of these services. When I became a WatchGuard customer, I bought WatchGuard simply for the web filtering services. I had a Barracuda spam firewall in there. And as soon as a couple months after I bought WatchGuard, the Barracuda ended up dying. I said, well, gosh, why am I going and looking at buying a new appliance for that when we have that security service right in the UTM? So we have the antivirus. And this is going out with a best of breed approach. So just like if you're familiar with BMW, for instance, you look at the radio in there, chances are that it's a Bose radio in there, or the tires are Pirelli. That's because BMW is in the ultimate driving experience with the car. They have the engine, they have the interior, but they know that they're not going to be the best in, for instance, audio manufacturing or tire manufacturing. So they've applied that similar concept with their business model. With web filtering, it was WebSense, which was bought out by ForcePoint, anti-spam, IPS, APT protection, and then it's all based on our platform of our Intel chip. Now, the other thing is, as you look at these services, we are all running on one box and all through one security purchase. As I mentioned, URL filtering was bought out by ForcePoint. So UTM is the tip number one. Sandboxing, tip number two. So as we look at, you can see there at Forrester Wave said that automated malware analysis is a necessity in every security stack. So as you're thinking about your users and they're double clicking on the Excel file, what actually happens after that fact? And in this sandbox environment, we emulate users clicking on files, interacting, and we're able to see our files coming to life after a stalling delay that they have. We're going to look to see if they're trying to evade sandbox analysis. And again, those are executables, Word documents, PDF files, APK files for Androids as well. Now, as we look at some of the tactics out there, certainly we see some of the more rudimentary, dear sir, madame, you've won $8 bajillion. We see some of those pretty basic attacks out there. But certainly we've also seen the evolution of phishing, where someone takes a little bit more time and they say, you know, this target might be part of they might be a CPA. And how can I get a CPA firm to be able to interact with this email? And part of that is by threatening that this governing body will revoke their licensing unless they click on this PDF file. Now, myself, fortunately, I have WatchGuard. I have quite a few WatchGuards in my lab, and I do travel a bit. So had I not had WatchGuard, and had I received an email from what I would consider as from American Airlines, now some of you might be saying, well, it says, Johan, it says right there, details at bartlesvilleheatandair.com. It can't be from American Airlines. That's true. How many of your users would pick up on that though? And as we look at the body of that email, it says your order is processed. So had I not had that sandboxing analysis, it would have delivered that zip file to my desktop, and who knows what would have happened. I might have clicked on it and it encrypted my files from there. So great example of how you're able to protect your email from that. So tip number 3, update spear phishing awareness. And that's, if you only come away with one thing today, well, 2 things: increase your security awareness and update spear phishing awareness with your users. So you can have training. I've seen people have campaigns where they come in and they deliver some sort of email that is it's a benign email. It's not malicious on the network, but certainly that allows them to track on who clicks on those interesting looking emails. Also worry about or warn about CEO scams. We've seen an uptick where an email goes off to the CFO and pretending to be the CEO, and they say, gosh, send this wire order here for this new orders. And unfortunately, it is still successful in some organizations. So make sure that you go and discuss about CEO scams as well. Inspect encrypted traffic. So tip number 4. And as I mentioned before, we're also seeing, for instance, command and control traffic going across NTP, DNS. A lot of you, if you have Best Buy, some sort of Best Buy appliance on there, Netgear, that's basically allowing all traffic out. So you want to take it to a model where we're moving away from a Swiss cheese model of security to now we only allow, we know what traffic is going out. And part of that is by inspecting that encrypted traffic. Now, as you might have noticed, is you go to Google, you go to Facebook, more and more websites are becoming encrypted. For instance, they have HTTPS, which signifies that no one else should be able to listen in on that. Now, in that environment, a lot of firewalls aren't inspecting that traffic, and that's all malicious traffic going out there. Now, I didn't have that, unfortunately, as I brought up my incident on the network hippie side. So I looked and I was transmitting plain text passwords over FTP, email, you name it. I had passwords flying all over the wire, and encrypted traffic hides that in most cases, unless someone's playing a man-in-the-middle attack, which our secure Wi-Fi products can address as well. But very few networks are inspecting traffic. As we see there, 75% of network traffic will be encrypted by 2019. 41% of malware in 2016 used encryption. And I can guarantee you that that number is going to go up, because as the hackers are becoming more successful with using encryption, obviously they're going to use it more. So I can't stress that enough, that we need to come into it as a mindset that we need to inspect that traffic. Now, there is a degradation of speed due to SSL inspection. At WatchGuard, we actually have a processing chip that offloads that and handles that encryption, decryption process as well, which then gives you your faster throughputs than some of our competitors out there. Tip number 5, defang malware's command and control channel. It's not a matter of necessarily if you'll get it infected, it's when you will. And ultimately, one of the keys to that is being able to stop that malware command and control traffic. When I first got into looking into ransomware, I disabled, for instance, antivirus, disabled sandboxing on my firewall, finally was able to get some sort of remnant of CryptoLocker on my desktop. I went to double click on it to run it, and nothing ended up happening. So in looking at our logs, which I'll talk about visibility in a brief moment here, looking at our logs, it was apparent that WebBlocker was blocking that command and control traffic. So it could be that you're not necessarily concerned with monitoring and controlling your users' content, what they're surfing online. Certainly, if I'm in Alaska, I wouldn't suggest blocking guns or gun websites, because that's a big part of what they do up there. But as we talk about your environment, maybe it's not that you're concerned about adult content or blocking weapons, but it's potentially about this idea of blocking malware command and control traffic, which ended up blocking my malware from calling home. So on web blocker or any or most other web filtering providers, you can block that traffic. So go ahead and inspect that or look into that, blocking that traffic. Protect the endpoints with TDR. That was that demonstration that I showed you that my laptop was away from the corporate network. I ran that piece of malware and it was still able to encrypt it until I turned on TDR. So again, the firewall actually becomes the network sensor on there. So if a computer is calling home command and control traffic, it's going to be able to correlate that traffic with what's actually happening on the endpoint. So APT blockers running on the firewall, and then on the host sensor, which is loaded on the laptops, they have the ability to check in with the cloud and to do sandbox analysis. Under TDR, we have 3 different engines. We actually have a heuristics engine, network events engine, and behavior analysis engine, all under one core sensor. So as we come into the last tip, businesses are missing breaches. So as we look at, users or network administrators knowing what's going on in the network, I can't tell you how many times I heard, Johan, the network's slow today. Who's doing what? And can we do anything about it? So with network visibility, we actually have the ability to look at that gap of data collection and security and look at, are people monopolizing the network with YouTube traffic? As March is right around the corner, March Madness is it was a painful day on any network. So the ability to say, let's go ahead and have the firewall limit that to maybe 2 megabits per second or 10% of the total available bandwidth so that we're not monopolizing that network. You can use visibility in so many different ways. I had someone call me up and they had their firewall misconfigured, so the firewall was sending out email. A computer inside the network was sending out email, and it lowered their spam reputation record. He said, "Gosh, Johan, I have about 3,000 computers. How am I going to find and address that one computer?" I said, "Well, log into WatchGuard Dimension and look at that traffic for email." And within a matter of minutes, he was able to find one computer, that needle in a haystack, literally, that was sending out spam emails because it was infected with a virus. And he was able to obviously address it from there. So as we round things up with a best security practices checklist, I'll keep this on the screen and I'll see if we have any questions come in. And then certainly if we have some questions, or if you have a question, you can go ahead and submit those via the questions panel and we'll address those. So it looks like we have a few questions here. So the first question, what if I'm worried about high availabilities? Do your products support that? Absolutely. If you're, for instance, a bank, or you're you have a business that any downtime represents a loss of revenue, high availability is a must for your organization. And then certainly high availability just means that you get 2 identical firewalls. Now, WatchGuard actually has promotions where you can actually just pay for one firewall and then pay 50% for the second firewall. And as you update it, as you know, with your cell phone, you go to update your cell phone because the newer firmwares come out and it needs to reboot. So as your firewall, your primary reboots due to an upgrade, or you're telling it to reboot, the backup device then becomes the primary and takes over that network traffic. So absolutely, that is called an active passive fire cluster in that scenario. Second question, can your product block traffic from various countries known for hacking like Russia or China? Absolutely. So that's called a geo blocking, where essentially you just say, you know what, my organization has no business dealing with anything in China or Russia. We're going to go ahead and block that country from transmitting anything or receiving anything from your networks. And, when we look at those attacks that are going on, a large number of those attacks obviously are from those countries. So great question. And yes, we have a solution to be able to address that. And
Johan, I've got a question that came in here on my panel. and it asks about blocking things like BitTorrents and illegal downloads and things like that. Does WatchGuard have the capability to block that kind of thing?
Absolutely. So through application control, you can absolutely block, as I mentioned, that you can block that traffic like BitTorrent, or you can say, you know what, we want it to not monopolize our network. Depending on your business needs, it's extremely flexible to be able to configure that. So absolutely, we can block those malicious types of traffic. And then I had one over here as well. Can your products be a replacement for my expensive MPLS network? Absolutely. So as you look at your budget, and if you were like, you had a budget like mine, it was dwindling over years. A lot of times organizations with multi-sites are paying for some sort of MPLS network. You can actually spin up a branch office VPN, so you have encrypted traffic between the two sites. That is, it's going to give you a similar feel to that of a MPLS network, and that you can now access file shares or printer shares at your remote location. So that is all the questions I had thus far. Do you have any more on your side, Chad?
You know, I don't see any more, Johan. I want to thank you for your presentation, and I do want to bring up something that I saw this morning. So obviously here at Verve Networks, we use a redundant pair of WatchGuards against our internet connections. But one thing I see, and maybe you can solve the mystery for me, is we use Office 365 as well. And even just this morning with Office 365, with all the filtering they have, with the WatchGuard on the perimeter, I got an email from DocuSign that talked about me clicking to access a document. And when I hovered over that link, I noticed that it had nothing to do with DocuSign. It was actually a bit of a scam. What would have happened with my WatchGuard in place had I not noticed that it was a scam and clicked on that link?
That's an excellent question. So as you clicked on that link, the first thing it would have done is the firewall would have said, is that link in a known bad database? Now that database is updated live from WebSense or ForcePoint. So a good chance are that if someone else was out there, they've reported that link. Now, if they hadn't, then we're on to the next phase. So your computer then reaches out and starts that download process. As that download comes back into Verve Networks, it hits that redundant pair. One of the first steps it's going to do is look at antivirus. So it's going to say, is there a known signature for this? If there is not a known signature for that, then it's going to pass it through antivirus. The next step is that sandboxing analysis. We're going to say, let's analyze what actually happens in this environment that's going on as we were pretending to be Chad and click on this file. Then as that file is passes through, it lands on the desktop. Then TDR looks at that file and says, first of all, it looks in its known database again and says, do we know about this? And that's a cloud lookup. Do we know about this file? If not, we're going to then monitor what actually happens. So worst case scenario, that file gets to your desktop. Chad clicks on that file. Now let's look at, is it dropping in registry entries? Is it trying to add in executables in there? If so, let's go ahead and shut it down very quickly. Now, some of the differentiating factors with WatchGuard is that we stop that encryption process before it even happens, as you saw by my example. Now, if you look at some of our competitors, unfortunately, they need to allow that encryption process to start before they can detect it, and then they try to roll back in that scenario. So ultimately, as we look at this holistic approach to security, that multi-factor layered defense strategy, it's a very good guarantee that one of those components is going to stop that file from doing anything malicious on your desktop.
Excellent. So WatchGuard would have had my back in that, in all likelihood.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Now, as a good user awareness, I would still not recommend clicking on that now that you've done your due diligence and you see that it has nothing to do with. Yes.
Yeah, we don't want to go clicking on those links, but not everybody's aware, and We just need to make sure our users know to do that type of thing, but we also need technology that supports us should a user make a bad decision, which is usually the case. On the screen, you see the family of WatchGuard appliances that Johan scrolled through real fast there. Myself or members of my team here at Verve Networks will be reaching out to y'all to see if there's any unanswered questions or if you want to get a demonstration or look deeper at this product. We really appreciate everybody's time this morning. I hope that y'all have a Merry Christmas, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Have a great day.